If you're trying to decide which DAW to learn for metal, I honestly think people make this decision way harder than it needs to be. Every time this question comes up, you see the same debate. Pro Tools, Cubase, Studio One, Logic, Ableton. Everybody has a different opinion. But after almost 15 years of mixing metal professionally and hundreds of records later, I still open the exact same DAW every single day. Reaper. And no, it's not because it's the cheapest, it's because after all these years, I still haven't found a reason to leave. So in this video, I want to show you exactly why I made that decision and why, if you're recording metal at home, I honestly think it's one of the easiest software decisions you'll ever make. Think back to when you bought your first interface. It probably came with some stripped down version of a DAW. Maybe it only let you record a handful of tracks, or maybe half the plugins were disabled. It worked until it didn't. Then you decide you actually want to record a full band, real drums, quad track guitars, bass DIs, vocals. Suddenly that free software isn't enough anymore. So naturally you start looking around. Maybe it's Pro Tools, maybe Cubase, maybe Studio One. Logic looks interesting until you realize you need a Mac. Ableton gets recommended, but most of what you see is electronic music and live performance. Before you know it, you've got 15 browser tabs open, and everybody online is telling you a different answer. That was me back in 2012. At the time, I was using Cubase LE because it came with my interface. It was fine. I wasn't looking for a new DAW because I hated Cubase. I just knew that if I was serious about doing this, eventually I was going to have to pick something and really learn it. So I started asking around. And back then, there was one place everyone seemed to end up. The Andy Sneap forum. If you're not familiar with Andy Sneap, he's produced bands like Megadeth, Judas Priest, Testament, Arch Enemy. Basically, if you wanted to learn metal production 15 years ago, that forum was the place to be. I remember reading thread after thread from engineers whose work I genuinely looked up to, and one recommendation kept coming up over and over again. Reaper. And it wasn't because it's cheap, it's not because it was new, it was because the people making the records I wanted to sound like were using it every day. I remember thinking, if these guys are making albums that sound like this, maybe I should stop overthinking it. So I downloaded Reaper, honestly expecting I'd probably use it for a week, and almost 14 years later, I'm still opening it every morning. Now, was the Andy Sneap forum the only reason I stuck with Reaper? No. I downloaded it because of those recommendations, but I stayed because it just made sense. And honestly, the first thing that really stood out to me wasn't even the workflow. It was the fact that I could actually take my time learning it. Reaper gives you a fully functional 60-day evaluation. Not a stripped down version, not a demo with half the features locked. It's the actual software. I think that's a bigger deal than people realize. Learning a DAW isn't something you do over a weekend. You're building templates, figuring out routing, learning shortcuts, making mistakes, starting over. You need time to figure out whether the workflow actually clicks with your brain. Reaper lets you do that before you spend $1. Then, when you're ready to buy, it's $60. That's it. And this is where I think people sometimes lose perspective. We spend so much time trying to save money on microphones, interfaces, plugins, then we'll happily spend hundreds of dollars every year just to keep our DAW running. Personally, I've never understood that. Pro Tools Studio is around $300 a year, depending on the plan. Over 10 years, that's roughly $3,000. $3,000 that isn't making your snare sound any better, or your guitars tighter, or your vocals clearer. It's just the software you're opening. Imagine you're just getting started. Would you rather have an extra $3,000 invested in your studio? Better microphones, better monitors, better amp sims, maybe a nicer interface? Or would you rather say, well, at least I had the expensive DAW? For me, that's never been a difficult decision. I've had the same Reaper license since 2012. Think about that for a second. Hundreds of mixes, thousands of hours inside that software, and it's still the DAW I open every morning. Not because I'm stubborn. If something genuinely made me faster or helped me make better mixes, I'd switch tomorrow. I have absolutely no loyalty to software. My loyalty is to getting the best result for my clients. Reaper just happens to be the tool that's done that better than anything else I've tried. Honestly, the workflow is the reason I've stayed on Reaper. If Reaper was just the cheap option, I would have moved on years ago. The workflow is what kept me. And I don't think I fully appreciated it until I've been using other DAWs here and there over the years. Every time I did, I found myself thinking the same thing. Why is this harder than it needs to be? Let me show you what I mean. In a lot of DAWs, before you even start recording, you're making decisions. Do I need an audio track, a MIDI track, a stereo track, a mono track, an instrument track? In Reaper, a track is just a track. If I drag a guitar DI onto the track, it's an audio track. If I drop a MIDI file, it's a MIDI track. If I drop a stereo audio file, it's a stereo audio file. It doesn't matter. Reaper figures it out. That might not sound like a huge deal until you're halfway through a mix, because Metal sessions aren't exactly simple. You've got close mic drums, overheads, rooms, samples, bass DIs, rhythm guitars, lead guitars, vocal doubles, harmonies, effects. Before you know it, you've got 50, 60, sometimes even more tracks. The last thing I want to be thinking about is what kind of track I need. I just want to create it and keep moving. And then there's folders. This is probably my favorite thing about Reaper. In most DAWs, folders are just folders. They're there to keep things organized. In Reaper, they're doing two jobs at once. They're organizing your session, and they're automatically becoming your buses. So over here, if I click this button and make a drum folder, every drum track underneath it is automatically feeding that drum bus. You can see throughout the session I do the same thing for a lot of tracks. We got it for guitars and got it for effects tracks here, and this song doesn't have vocals, but it would be the same thing with vocals as well. I don't have to stop and think, okay, now how do I route all of this? It's already done. And maybe that sounds like a small thing, but it isn't. Every one of those little workflow improvements saves a few seconds, then a few more, then a few more. And when you're doing this every day, over hundreds of sessions, those seconds become hours. That's the stuff I actually care about, not flashy features, not marketing buzzwords, just software that gets out of my way. Then you've got customization. And honestly, this is where Reaper becomes whatever you want it to be. Custom shortcuts, custom actions, custom menus, templates, toolbars, macros. Pretty much everything can be customized. The nice thing is, you don't have to learn all that day one. I've been using Reaper for almost 14 years. Every once in a while I'll think, I wish this only took one click. And most of the time, there's a way to make that happen. I think that's probably the biggest misconception people have about Reaper. They think people recommend it because it's inexpensive. I don't. I recommend it because after years of using it, it almost disappears. I'm not thinking about the DAW anymore. I'm thinking about the kick drum or the guitars or whether the chorus feels big enough. That's where I want my attention, not on the software. Now, whenever this conversation comes up, somebody always says, yeah, but Pro Tools is the industry standard. And honestly, they're not wrong. If you're walking into a major commercial recording studio, chances are you'll see Pro Tools. That's been true for a long time. But here's the question I think you should actually be asking. Does that matter for what you're trying to do? Because those are two completely different worlds. A commercial studio tracking major label bands with assistants, dedicated recording rooms, HDX systems, racks full of outboard gear isn't the same environment as someone recording metal in a spare bedroom or home studio. And that's who I'm talking to in this video. Think about your own workflow. You're recording guitars, programming drums, editing, mixing, maybe sending tracks to somebody else to master. At what point does anyone actually care what DAW you're using? They don't. They care about the WAV files you send them. I've been fortunate enough to work alongside Alan Douches for years. He's mastered records for bands like Mastodon, All That Remains, Fall Out Boy, and thousands of others. Not once has he ever asked me, hey Dan, what DAW do you mix this in? He listens to the mix. That's it. And if the mix sounds great, nobody cares what software it came from. Funny enough, we've been working together for 8 years, and it wasn't until last year that he even found out I use Reaper. He thought this whole time I was working in Pro Tools. I think this is something that newer producers sometimes get hung up on. We spend so much time worrying about having the professional tools that we forget what actually makes a professional record. It's not the DAW. It's the decisions you're making inside of it. The mic placement, editing, arrangement, performances, EQ, compression, balance. Those are the things people hear. Nobody has ever listened to a mix and said, man, I bet this was mixed in Reaper. Personally, I think the best DAW is the one that disappears. The one that lets you stop thinking about software and start thinking about music. That's what Reaper became for me. And after almost 14 years, I honestly don't spend any time thinking about my DAW anymore. I'm thinking about making the snare hit harder, getting the guitars wider, making the chorus feel bigger. That's where my attention should be. So if somebody asked me today, Dan, I'm just getting into recording. What DAW should I learn? My answer would be Reaper. Every single time. Not because it's the cheapest, not because it's trendy, not because somebody paid me to say it, because after hundreds of records, it's still the DAW I trust the most. Now I'm curious, what DAW are you using right now? And if you're thinking about switching, what's the biggest thing holding you back? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm always interested to hear about why people choose the DAWs they do. And if you're just getting started recording metal at home, don't forget that I've got free guides for recording guitars, drums, bass, vocals, all that linked down below. They'll save you a lot of trial and error. Now that you've got your DAW figured out, the next step is making sure the tracks you're recording are actually ready for mixing. I put together a full video showing you exactly how to prepare your tracks before they ever get sent off to be mixed. Whether you're mixing your own music or sending it to someone else, getting this part right makes a huge difference. I'll put that video right over here. Go watch that next. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.